a new way forward for the VybeShift Podcast. Before we begin today's episode, I want to share a small but important change we're making at the VybeShift Podcast. Over the last year, we've explored many of the challenges that thoughtful, capable people face. Feeling overwhelmed, being pulled in too many directions, losing connection with themselves, questioning what matters, and doubting their own decisions. What I've come to realize is that insight alone is rarely enough. Recognition is powerful, but transformation happens when we take time to reflect, integrate, and apply what we are discovering. So moving forward, each VybeShift episode will be presented in 3 parts. At the end of each part, I'll offer several reflection questions designed to help you explore how the topic shows up in your own life. You can simply think about the questions, discuss them with someone you trust, journal your responses, or bring them into your meditation practice. The goal isn't to give you more information. The goal is to help you create more awareness, because awareness is often where meaningful change begins. My hope is that this new format will help transform these episodes from something you simply listen to into something you actively experience. So with that intention in mind, let's begin. Welcome back to the VybeShift Podcast. I'm Paul Shepardson, and today we're discussing why does everything feel so heavy? Part 1, the weight you stop noticing. There's a question I hear over and over again from successful, capable, thoughtful people. Not always with words. Sometimes it comes through exhaustion. Sometimes it comes through frustration. Sometimes it comes through a quiet moment when they finally stop long enough to notice what has been there all along. The question sounds something like this. Why does everything feel so heavy? Not difficult, not impossible, heavy. Heavy to get out of bed, heavy to make decisions, heavy to answer emails, heavy to return phone calls, heavy to think about the future, heavy to carry responsibilities that once felt meaningful. And perhaps the most confusing part of all is that many people cannot point to a single reason why. Nothing catastrophic has happened. Life may even look successful from the outside. The bills are paid, the family is functioning, the career is moving forward, the responsibilities are being handled. Yet somewhere beneath all of that, there is a growing sense that simply carrying life has become exhausting. And because there is no obvious explanation, many people assume the problem must be them. Maybe I'm getting lazy. Maybe I'm losing my edge. Maybe I need more discipline. Maybe I need more motivation. Maybe I need to push harder. So they do exactly what high-achieving people have always done. They push, they grind, they perform, they carry more. And strangely, the heavier life feels, the more they attempt to compensate by adding effort. But what if the heaviness is not a sign that you need to carry more? What if it's a sign that you have been carrying too much for too long? Because here's what often happens. Life rarely becomes heavy all at once. It happens gradually. One responsibility, one expectation, one obligation, one disappointment, one unfinished grief, one sacrifice, one compromise, one season of survival, then another. And because human beings are remarkably adaptable, we learn to carry these things without even noticing, until one day we do. I often think about someone carrying a backpack. Imagine placing a single stone into it. No problem. Then another, then another, then another. None of them seem significant individually, but eventually the person begins wondering why the hike feels so difficult. They do not realize the backpack has become filled with stones. This is how emotional heaviness works. Most people are not carrying one overwhelming burden. They are carrying hundreds of small ones. Responsibilities they never questioned, expectations they inherited, roles they accepted, conversations they avoided, losses that they never fully processed, dreams they quietly abandoned, versions of themselves they outgrew years ago but continue trying to maintain. And eventually the weight becomes normal. The burden becomes familiar. The exhaustion becomes expected. The heaviness becomes part of their identity. At that point, they stop asking, "What am I carrying?" and begin asking, "What's wrong with me?" That is a very different question, because the first question creates awareness. The second question creates self-judgment. One leads towards freedom. The other leads towards shame. What if nothing is wrong with you? What if your exhaustion is not weakness? What if your overwhelm is not failure? What if your heaviness is actually information? What if your mind, body, and spirit have been trying to tell you something for quite some time? What if they are saying, "I can continue carrying this, but I don't think I should anymore"? For many people, this realization becomes a turning point, not because they immediately know what to change, not because they suddenly have all the answers, but because they stop treating themselves like the problem. They begin becoming curious about the weight itself, and curiosity changes everything. Because once you begin looking honestly at what you are carrying, you often discover something surprising. Some of it is yours, some of it isn't. Some of it is still necessary. Some of it stopped being necessary years ago. Some of it supports your life. Some of it simply consuming your energy. And until you can see the difference, everything feels equally heavy. Today is not about fixing that. Today is about recognizing it, because recognition always comes before transformation. Before we can change what we carry, we must first become aware of what we have been carrying all along. And perhaps that is where your journey begins. Not with a solution, not with a strategy, not with another thing to do, but with a simple, honest question. What am I carrying that I no longer need to carry alone? Questions for reflection. 1. When did life begin feeling heavier than it used to? And what was happening during that season of your life? Reflection question 2. What responsibility, expectation, or burden feels normal to you now, but if you were completely honest, has been draining your energy for quite some time? Reflection question number 3. If your exhaustion could speak, what would it be trying to tell you that you have not been willing to hear? Coming up in part 2, how capable, caring, responsible people slowly become the ones carrying everything, and why that pattern eventually becomes unsustainable. Part 2, the person who carries everything. One of the most interesting things about emotional heaviness is that it rarely falls on people who are unwilling to contribute. In fact, it often falls on the exact opposite people. The dependable ones, the responsible one, the helpers, the fixers, the caregivers, the leaders, the people who have spent much of their lives being the person others could count on. If you are listening to this episode, there's a good chance that you recognize yourself somewhere in that description. You have likely been the person who stepped forward when something needed to be done. The person who figured things out when others became overwhelmed. The person who absorbed uncertainty so others could feel safe. The person who held things together when circumstances threatened to pull everything apart. And for a long time, those qualities served you well. They helped you build a life. They helped you build relationships. They helped you build a career. They helped you survive difficult seasons. But there's a shadow side to strength that few people talk about. When people learn that you are capable, they begin bringing things to you. When people learn that you are reliable, they begin depending upon you. When people learn that you will help, they begin expecting help. And when people learn that you can carry weight, they often stop noticing how much you're carrying. Sometimes you stop noticing it also. What begins as generosity gradually becomes responsibility. What begins as responsibility gradually becomes obligation. What begins as obligation gradually becomes identity. Without realizing it, you stop being a person who helps, you become the person who carries. And those are not the same thing. Helping is a choice. Caring becomes a role that can slowly consume enormous amounts of emotional, mental, and spiritual energy. Because once caring becomes part of your identity, something subtle begins to happen. You stop asking whether something is yours to carry. You simply pick it up. A problem occurs. You pick it up. Someone is struggling. You pick it up. A relationship becomes difficult. You pick it up. An uncertainty emerges. You pick it up. A family member is hurting. You pick it up. A financial concern arises. You pick it up. A dream feels threatened. You pick it up. And over time, your life becomes filled with responsibilities that may not have been consciously chosen. Not because you're weak, not because you lack boundaries, but because caring has become automatic. Many people do not realize how deeply this pattern runs until they reach a moment of exhaustion. A moment when they find themselves asking, "Why am I so tired?" And the answer is often surprising. They're not tired because they're doing too little. They are tired because they have become emotionally responsible for too much. There is an important distinction here. Physical responsibility has limits. You can only work so many hours. You can only attend so many meetings. You can only complete so many tasks. But emotional responsibility has no natural limits. You can spend every waking moment carrying concerns, worries, expectations, possibilities, and outcomes inside your mind. You can carry the future. You can carry the past. You can carry the needs of people you love. You can carry problems that have not even happened yet. And because none of that weight is visible, it often goes unnoticed. Imagine walking through life carrying an invisible suitcase. Nobody sees it. Nobody comments on it. Nobody asks whether it is becoming heavy. They simply see you continuing to walk. Meanwhile, the weight inside continues to grow. This is one reason so many capable people feel alone in their struggle. The world often celebrates their strengths without seeing the cost of it. People admire the results. Few people see the weight required to produce them. And eventually a question begins to emerge, a question that can feel uncomfortable at first. But it is also a profoundly important one. Who taught me that I had to carry all of this? Sometimes the answer comes from childhood. Sometimes it comes from a family role. Sometimes it comes from professional environments. Sometimes it comes from seasons of crisis when carrying everything genuinely was necessary. But what was once necessary is not always necessary forever. That is an important distinction. Many people continue operating according to the rules that were written during survival seasons, rules that once protected us, rules that helped us succeed, rules that once helped us navigate uncertainty. But survival rules often become burdens when carried into seasons that require something different. A person who spends years learning to be strong may eventually need to learn how to receive support. A person who spent years solving everyone else's problems may eventually need to learn how to honor their own needs. A person who spent years carrying everything may eventually need to learn that worthiness is not measured by how much weight they can endure. That realization can feel unsettling, because if your identity has become intertwined with carrying, setting things down can feel irresponsible. It can feel selfish. It can feel uncomfortable. It can feel frightening. Yet, there's a profound difference between abandoning responsibility and releasing unnecessary burden. One carries freedom, the other carries chaos. Many people avoid examining the distinction because they assume the two are the same. They are not. In fact, some of the healthiest people you will ever meet have learned a beautiful truth. They still care deeply. They still contribute meaningfully. They still show up for others, but they no longer carry what does not belong to them. They understand something many of us spend years learning. Compassion does not require ownership. Love does not require self-sacrifice. Support does not require self-abandonment. And strength is not measured by how much pain, pressure, responsibility, or uncertainty you can absorb. True strength often looks much quieter. It looks like wisdom. It looks like discernment. It looks like knowing what is yours to carry and what is not. Because the goal of life was never to become the strongest pack mule on the mountain. The goal was to walk the journey with enough presence, energy, and aliveness to actually experience it. And if everything feels heavy right now, perhaps the question is not, how do I become stronger? Perhaps the question is, what have I been carrying that was never mine to carry in the first place? Questions for reflection. Number 1. Where in your life have you unconsciously become the one who carries everything? And what has that role cost you emotionally, mentally, and spiritually? Reflection question number 2. What burden are you carrying today because you genuinely choose to carry it? And what burden are you carrying simply because it has become a habit? Reflection question number 3. If you no longer measured your worth by how much you could endure, what might you finally allow yourself to set down? Coming up in part 3. What happens when we stop trying to become stronger and instead learn how to become lighter? And why releasing emotional weight is often the beginning of coming home to ourselves. Part 3. Becoming lighter. There comes a moment in many people's lives when they realize something that changes everything. Not because it's new, but because they finally become ready to hear it. The realization is this: the answer is not becoming stronger. For years, perhaps decades, the strategy has been the same. Carry more, endure more, push harder, figure it out, keep going, hold it together. And to be fair, that strategy may have worked. It may have helped you survive difficult seasons. It may have helped you provide for your family. It may have helped you navigate uncertainty, heartbreak, financial pressure, illness, disappointment, or loss. But survival strategies have a way of outliving their usefulness. What helps us survive one season can quietly become the thing that prevents us from fully living the next. Many people spend years trying to increase their capacity to carry weight. Very few stop and ask whether the weight itself belongs there. Imagine preparing for a long hike. You could spend months building strength. You could increase your endurance. You could improve your conditioning. You could become capable of carrying a heavier backpack. But if half the contents of the backpack are unnecessary, strength is not the most effective solution. The simplest solution is to remove what no longer belongs inside. Yet emotionally, many of us do the opposite. We focus almost entirely on becoming stronger. We rarely examine what we are carrying. Why? Because examining the weight requires honesty, and honesty can be uncomfortable. It asks questions many of us have spent years avoiding. What expectations am I carrying that no longer serve me? What responsibilities have I accepted that were never truly mine? What version of myself am I still trying to maintain? What stories am I still believing about who I have to be? What fears are consuming energy without creating solutions? What relationships, commitments, or obligations are asking to be reevaluated? These are not easy questions, but they are liberating ones, because heaviness often persists not because life is impossible, but because awareness has not yet arrived. The moment we become conscious of what we are carrying, choice becomes available. and choice changes everything. For example, some people discover they are carrying expectations they inherited from others. Expectations about success, expectations about productivity, expectations about relationships, expectations about who they should be by now. They have been carrying these expectations for so long that they assume that they are facts. But when examined closely, they often reveal themselves as borrowed beliefs. Others discover they are carrying unresolved grief. Not dramatic grief, not always the grief associated with death, but the grief of roads not taken, dreams postponed, identities outgrown, friendships changed, chapters ended. Many people are exhausted not because they are weak, but because they are carrying years of unacknowledged grief. Still others discover that they are carrying a future that has not happened yet. They spend enormous amounts of emotional energy rehearsing possibilities, preparing for outcomes, managing uncertainties, trying to control variables that cannot be controlled. The mind believes it is creating safety. In reality, it is often creating exhaustion. And perhaps that is where the deepest shift begins. Not by asking, how do I carry all of this? But by asking, what if I don't have to? That question can feel radical, especially for people who have built their identities around responsibility. Yet it opens the door to an entirely different relationship with life. A relationship built not on constant effort, but on conscious choice. Not on endless endurance, but on discernment. Not on self-sacrifice, but on self-awareness. This does not mean abandoning responsibility. It does not mean becoming indifferent. It does not mean withdrawing from life. It means becoming intentional. It means recognizing that your energy is precious, your attention is precious, your life is precious, and where these resources are invested matters. The goal is not to carry nothing. The goal is to carry what matters, to carry what aligns with your values, to carry what supports your purpose, to carry what is authentically yours, and to release what is not. Because something beautiful begins to happen when we do. The heaviness starts to change. Not because external circumstances immediately improve, not because every problem disappears, not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because we stop fighting life while carrying unnecessary weight. We begin moving through our days with more presence, more clarity, more energy, more peace, and perhaps most importantly, more connection to ourselves. That connection is what many people are truly longing for. Not a perfect life, not a problem-free existence, not endless happiness, simply a return to themselves, a return to the part of them that existed before the expectations, before the pressure, before the endless carrying, before they became convinced that their value was determined by how much they could endure. Because beneath all of that weight, you are still there. The real you, the authentic you, the part of you that does not need to prove its worth through exhaustion. Part of you that does not need to earn rest. The part of you that does not need to carry everything to deserve belonging. The journey is not about becoming someone new. It's about releasing enough weight to rediscover who you have been all along. And perhaps that's the invitation this week. Not to push harder, not to become stronger, not to carry more, but to gently ask yourself, what would become possible if I allowed myself to become lighter? Questions for reflection. Number 1. What is one burden, expectation, or responsibility that you are now realizing may no longer belong in your emotional backpack? Reflection question number 2. How much of your current heaviness comes from your present reality, and how much comes from carrying the past or rehearsing the future? Reflection question number 3. If you allowed yourself to become lighter over the next 30 days, what would you stop carrying first? Continue the journey. If today's episode resonated with you, you may also find value in VSP number 4, I'm being pulled in too many directions at once. In this premium VybeShift experience, we explore what happens when your attention becomes fragmented, your priorities become blurred, and life begins pulling you in competing directions. More importantly, we explore how to reclaim clarity, focus, and alignment without adding more pressure to an already overloaded life. You can begin that experience here by following the link in the show notes. And if today's conversation touched something deeper, I invite you to explore the VybeShift Core Problems Library. The Core Problems Library was created for moments exactly like this. Those seasons when life feels heavier than it should. When you've lost connection with yourself. When you cannot turn your mind off. When you no longer know what matters. Or when you're being pulled in too many directions at once. These aren't random problems. They are deeply human experiences. And each one offers a doorway back to clarity, self-trust, and more authentic relationship with yourself. Because the goal of VybeShift has never been to help you become someone else. It has always been to help you remember who you are beneath everything you've been carrying. Until next time, remember, you do not need to carry everything. You only need to carry what is truly yours.